Donald Trump faces yet another indictment in very breaking news that I actually don't have a lot of articles on because, well, this is actually pretty fresh and we don't know what's going on entirely with this yet, but we'll go over some of that. We'll talk about what's happening there, what we do from this going forward, and what this means. In other news, Ray Epps' attorney fires back at Joe Rogan for calling January 6th a false flag on the same day, by the way. Well, it was a couple days before that the indictment got handed down, so we'll go over some of what's happening there. In an apparent slap to the face to Tommy Tuberville, Biden makes the decision to keep Space Command in Colorado, so we'll go over what's happening there. And the U.S. credit rating is cut from AA plus to AA plus from AAA. I'm sorry, I had that backwards in the beginning. By Fitch. So we'll go over what that means for our finances and what this does moving forward. It is going to be all of this and more. I was looking for a place called Lee Ho Fuchs. I'm Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Contemporary. My name is Jay Edgar. Ladies, drink free. I guess the question there should be, did anything happen today that we need to talk about? Anything at all? Anything that's important in the news? What was weird is I actually, even though it was a slow news day, and I'm going to be completely honest, there's a reason it was a slow news day today. Not only did we were having the debate on whether or not the indictment was going to come down or not, and I'm going to tell you off the bat that this was timed this way. We'll talk about this more when we get down to the main topic, but it is not an accident, because they were talking about, and they said the grand jury has found this and that and the next thing, and we sent the target letter all the way back 2 Sundays ago, and it took 2 weeks to go back and do this, really? Week and a half, I guess, but it took a week and a half for us to get from, hey, here's a target letter, to hey, here's your indictment announcement going on right here. And again, not an accident. They did this on purpose. So we'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about Georgia putting up their defenses again because, we're going to throw another indictment at him. News check. I would be very surprised if that comes in the next few days because, there's going to be something else that needs to be distracted from. The Democrats are demanding the release of Devin Archer's transcript, and I'm kind of on the same side as them for that. I want to see it. I want to see what's in there. But I believe what was in there, unlike they do. A nationwide light bulb ban will be on the news today. We'll talk about that later on. And Joe Biden playing politics with government agencies to slap the face of a Trumper? I don't know. We'll be going over some of that. And the big one here, and that's actually, I found this, I don't know when this actually was put up, but I found this as I hit the live button today. Which actually, the article came out at 4:19 Central Time, so it's not been out for very long, but our credit rating in the United States as well, we'll be talking about that today too. It's going to be all of this and more over here on Contemporary, so strap yourselves in, tell some friends, get some people in here. Let's talk indictment. And a reminder, you can be a lot freer in speech over on the Rumble side if you prefer. That is always an option for you, but We're going to get into it right now. So before we do, make sure you guys go check out great programming such as The Daily Ignoramus, The Breakdown with Birkenhoff, The R-Rated Conservative, The Porch Boys, Tweets by Brit, Mr. Behavior, The No Gimmicks Podcast, Silent Caster, Clone World Chronicles with Papa Palpatine, and Overruled with KTZed, as we bring you a better news experience from the common man for the common man. That's right. Stop getting your news from people that hate you and wear suits that cost more than your house. Get your news from people, and your culture, by the way, from people who are just like you. So go check out all that great programming. It's going to be a great time. And let's get down into our finance section of the day so we can get into, well, what everyone's here to talk about. Oh, not that finance article. That's for later on in the show. Our look at the Dow for the day. Looks like there was a big dip in the Dow today before climbing back up to just about the day's peak. Again, the Dow ending up 71.15 points, or about 1/5% on the day to 35,630.68. Not to a 52-week high yet today. The 52-week high remains at 35,679.13. So we've got something going on there. The futures are looking down for the morning. Tomorrow morning, we'll see what's happening with that and where that goes. Your Bitcoin also took a bit of a U-shape throughout the day today, spending most of its day down, but again, rising back up to just about the previous closes level once again. The Bitcoin losing $26.20 or 0.09% on the day to 29,204.40. So, a little bit moving and shaking with that. This is a global market, remember. The gas prices in Madison actually may have some good news for us here. Now, looking on the east side of Madison, we see that the outlier at 326 has risen up to start to move toward the 340s and 350s of the east side. But if you look over on the west side, we're actually seeing some droppage. This quick trip 954 was at 350 yesterday. That is at 330 right now. And the other two out on the west side are at 340. So there's some motion. It's not exactly clear where this is going to go and what this is going to trend to, because it's doing two different things on the different sides of town. But I would suggest, as I always do, to watch your local gas listings, see what the pattern is right now, especially in a situation where we cannot be completely sure where this is going to go. And remember, this is only a pattern of what's happening in one particular market, day over day for the last 3 years, and not necessarily what's happening in your neck of the woods. Our finance article today comes from IBD. Dow Jones futures fall on U.S. debt downgrade. AMD and ELF lead 5 earnings movers late. From Ed Carson. Dow futures fell modestly after hours, along with the S&P 500 futures and the NASDAQ futures, as the Fitch Ratings downgraded the U.S. long-term debt rating. AMD and ELF Beauty headlined another big night of earnings. The market rally was relatively quiet for a second straight day. The major indices were narrowly mixed, with the 10-year Treasury yield popping back above 4%, nearing the 2023 highs. Caterpillar soared to a record high in earnings, buoying the Dow Jones. Arista Networks skyrocketed from the bottom of a base into a buy zone. A number of leading chip stocks tumbled near the open following earnings. Some slashed or erased losses, but others were still down sharply at the close, including ALGM. Tesla fell modestly Tuesday amid a new NHTSA safety probe. Microsoft rose slightly. Both mega caps are continuing to consolidate after post-earnings retreats. Tesla's being investigated by the federal government again? Really? It's almost like Elon Man bad. We'll talk about Fitch later on in the show. On earnings, NVIDIA rival AMD stock, ELF Beauty, Vertex Pharmaceuticals, Exact Scientists, and Terex reported earnings Tuesday evening. ELF surged on blowout earnings and guidance, with AMD and Terex also up solidly. Vertex was little changed, while EXAS, Exact Scientists, fell. Dynatrace, Extreme Networks, Generac, and Clean Harbors report early on Wednesday. Dynatrace is extended but could offer an add-on, buy point at 55.87. Extreme Networks popped on Tuesday on Arista Networks earnings, bouncing from a 20-day line and getting above the bulk of a 3-week type pattern. This would offer an aggressive add-on entry, except for the upcoming earnings. Generac is holding in a range of a 152.13 buy point from a shelf or high handle just above a cup base. CLH Clean Harbors has been consolidating for a few weeks, recently finding support near the 21-day line. On the futures, Dow futures fell 0.2% versus fair value, the S&P retreated 0.4%, and the Nasdaq declined 0.4%. Futures lost some ground after the U.S. debt downgrade, so we'll be talking about that later on. Your layoffs report today, as was brought forward by the Mogwai in the chat already. Yes, I see you, Mogwai. I see what you're doing over there. CVS, 4 figures worth of workers, 5,000 of them to be exact. CVS is laying off 5,000 workers from Jordan Belinsky. Now the question again, and I haven't read the article previously, is are these going to be front-facing on the ground workers, or is this going to be another downgrade of the HR department? Let's read. Second paragraph, it's right there. CVS is laying off about 5,000 employees in a cost-cutting effort, the pharmacy chain confirmed on Tuesday. Reductions will occur in non-customer-facing positions, primarily affecting its corporate staff. According to a statement given to CNN, CVS said it is evolving to adapt to new customer health needs and expectations that it must take difficult steps to reduce expenses. So, that high-dollar office job that you went to 4 years of school plus 4 years of master's degree and 4 years of postdoctorate degree, just so you could sit in an HR office for the rest of your life, doesn't really seem like that good of an investment anymore. In fact, it almost seems like it would have been a better investment for you to stand at the counter for that entire time, given what the markets are doing. It's amazing to me, by the way. Now, I want to step back to something for this and go all the way back to the Obama administration, who assured us, Barack Obama stood on the stage and assured us that manufacturing jobs were never coming back. And in fact, you needed to go to a 4-year school and get one of these, either HR jobs or office jobs or something, still with one of the big companies, but you needed to get one of these types of jobs because you were too good for customer facing, not quite good enough for CEO or ownership, but good enough to be middle management. And that's, when we look at what's happening with tech, with retail, and with most jobs, except for pretty much Yellow was the only one that took everybody, they took everybody off the table. So that included all their HR and their corporate people, but for the most part, it's always the middle management that's getting wiped out. In spite of the fact that that being one of the biggest growing sectors, both before and during the pandemic. Mogwai says the pharmacist that almost never answers the phone is safe. We do not expect to be any impact to our customer-facing colleagues in our stores, pharmacies, clinics, or customer service centers, said the Rhode Island-based company. The Wall Street Journal, which first reported on the news, said the changes are part of CVS's efforts to focus on health services. In recent years, the chain has added more primary care offerings and expanded its health hub store layout. So, 5,000 people gone out of the workforce. But don't worry, everything is fine. This is fine, everything is fine. Alright. I know what we're all here to talk about, but I've got one to do right before that. And if you guys haven't noticed, I have been filibustering on the Pee Wee Herman thing. We are not going to talk about Pee Wee Herman today because I want to talk about that. On a day we're not talking about Hunter or Devon Archer or the next indictment. But I do want to talk about this one here. New Jersey Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver dead at 71, family says. Which she was actually the governor at the time when she was admitted to the hospital, acting governor, but... This is from Chris Pandolfo. New Jersey Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver, who made history as the first black woman to serve as Speaker of the State Assembly, died on Tuesday. Her family announced she was 71. Oliver served with Democrat Governor Phil Murphy, acting in his stead when he was out of state, and also administering the Department of Community Affairs, which coordinates state aid to towns and cities and supervises code enforcements. No cause of death was given in a statement released by Oliver's family through Murphy's office. It is with incredible sadness and a heavy heart that we announce the passing of Honorable Sheila Y. Oliver, Lieutenant Governor of the state of New Jersey. She was not only a distinguished public servant, but also cherished daughter, sister, aunt, friend, and hero, the family said in a statement. As we come to terms with this profound loss, we kindly request that you respect the privacy of the Oliver family during this difficult time as they grieve their beloved Sheila, the statement reads. As acting governor, Oliver signed a handful of bills, including a 2021 measure that established a pilot program to overhaul the state's juvenile justice system in 4 cities, and which aimed to reintegrate young people into their communities. Murphy's office announced July 31st Oliver was hospitalized while filling in for Murphy, who was in Italy on a family vacation. She was admitted to Cooperman Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston with an undisclosed medical condition on Monday, the governor's office said, declining to elaborate. And if the family doesn't want to put this out, then they shouldn't have to. I'm going to be the first one to come out and say that. It doesn't look like there was any foul play. It doesn't look like there was anything about medical procedures or anything that we can't talk about on YouTube. But as of right now, that is what's happening there. I'm sure that New Jersey is looking for a new lieutenant governor, so Murphy can go on more vacations. But I do wish Sheila Oliver well in her next journey. I hope that she was saved. I hope she can meet Christ at the end of days. I don't know what her situation was there, and I hope that she was. And I hope she can find peace in this next life. All right, what we did come here to talk about, we're going to start today with the Dissociated Press. There are a few articles I'm probably going to skip over on this because a lot of them are going to be saying the same thing. But the Dissociated Press, to start off with the day, Trump charged by Justice Department for efforts to overturn his 2020 presidential loss. Now, let's make a reminder here. We were told that this was going to happen imminently a week and a half ago. It was not this past Sunday, but the Sunday before. No, I think it was longer than that, wasn't it? No, it was... I mean, it happened while I was at my dad's 2 weekends ago. But I didn't find out about it until I got home that night. So, a week and a half. We get this weird target letter that says, you are going to be indicted. Or that you're... It wasn't that he was even going to be indicted, because we didn't actually know that until today. Although, pretty much everybody on the left was resting on their laurels saying, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But we get the target letter saying that he is supposed to go back and surrender by the next Thursday, which came and went with nothing. With no indictment or anything. And in the meantime, we got more testimony about what was happening with Joe, and then we got the Devin Archer. Why did I want to say Chris Avalone? We got the Devin Archer testimony behind closed doors, which we will be talking about later on in the show. And this is why I said, and I think a lot of people knew this was coming. I think we've come to a point where we can predict the news cycle at this point. Something major breaks, and there's talk leading up to it. He's going to get indicted. We're going to get him this time. We're going to bring him into court. We're going to raid the Mar-a-Lago. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And we hear this over and over again for days and weeks, sometimes months, coming up to it. And the day that there's a big release about something that happened with Hunter, involving his dad, or Burisma, or anything else, the day after that we get, raid of Mar-a-Lago! Indictment! Indictment 2! Court date is moved! And I think a lot of people were trying to keep the news cycle open. So this could be the main thing on the evening. So basically, so they weren't sitting there writing a monologue and a teleprompter for the evening news that people are going to be watching around their dinner table. For that to all be changed by the end of the day. No, I know that movie. I've seen that movie. But let's read from the Disassociated Press. Eric Tucker reporting Donald Trump was indicted on felony charges Tuesday for working to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election in the run-up to the violent selfie fest by his supporters at the U.S. Capitol, as the Justice Department moved to hold him accountable for his efforts to block the peaceful transfer of power. That's funny because that's not actually in there. The 4-count indictment reveals new details about a dark chapter in modern American history, detailing handwritten notes from former Vice President Mike Pence about Trump's relentless goading, as well as how Trump sought to exploit the violence of the January 6th selfie fest to remain in office. How? I had almost sit down and watch this trial, except for it's going to be a federal trial and it's not going to be televised, just to see how you connected those dots. He publicly said, go home. Peacefully. Even in a year of rapid succession legal reckonings for Trump, Tuesday's criminal case, with charges including conspiring to defraud the U.S. government that he once led, was especially stunning in its allegation. No, it wasn't. I've read the indictment. No, it wasn't. That the former president assaulted the underpinnings of democracy in a frantic but ultimately failed effort to cling to power. Side note, and the Associated Press is guilty of this too. Every time one of these left-wing lunatics says our democracy, it pretty much anytime you say democracy, or one of these left-wing lunatics says democracy, but especially when it's our democracy, because that's they don't talk about ending democracy so much as it's always he's a threat to our democracy. Change the word democracy to hegemony, and again, this works especially when they say our in front of it. It works still somewhat when they just say democracy the few times that they do, but when they say our democracy in front of it, change that word to hegemony. And reread the post or re-listen to the quotation again. Except change the word democracy to hegemony, and you'll start to see what their real agenda is. And again, the Dissociated Press is not innocent of this. Let's read this again. Even in a rapid succession, legal reckonings for Trump, Tuesday's criminal case, with charges including conspiring to defraud the U.S. government that he once led, was especially stunning in its allegations that a former president assaulted the underpinnings of our hegemony in a frantic but ultimately failed effort to cling to power. It accuses him of repeatedly lying about the election results, turning aside repeated overtures from some aides to tell the truth, but conspiring with others to try to improperly change vote totals in his favor. It says that on the day of the January 6, 2021 Selfie Fest, he attempted to exploit the chaos by pushing to delay the certification of election results, even after the building was cleared of mostly peaceful protesters. Let's talk about what happened that day. Now again, my friend Stephen Ignoramus was there. There were a few people outside of the Capitol who were trying to push and make things look good for the camera, and trying to goad more and more people to go into the Capitol. There was a 45-minute segment of the Stephen Ignoramus stream where he was inside the rotunda, which is what he got charged with, by the way. Essentially, being inside the rotunda. But in that 45 minutes, you didn't see people breaking down walls, shattering windows, screaming. There were a couple chants of USA in there. And there were a few people that did get past and into the halls of Congress. But any footage that we actually saw from the halls of the Capitol building were mostly empty. Like what we saw with Jacob Chansley walking around. And in fact, the vast majority of what was happening in the rotunda was several hundred people. I think there were like 300 people in the rotunda, which is huge. Wall to wall, shoulder to shoulder, looking around, asking themselves, hey, what do we do now? Now, of course, that's footage that the mainstream media doesn't want you to see, because that's devastating to the narrative that everybody who set or approached the Capitol was a violent insurrectionist who was armed, of course, in spite of the fact that nobody was actually armed for this insurrection, so much as they call it. But I want to talk about the legal procedure for what's happening here. Now, it would be unprecedented for there to not have been the official count, done by January the 20th. January the 6th is, I mean, even in what we're seeing here, a mostly symbolic day. On most every January 6th, on an election year, or following an election year rather, before this day, everybody gathered in to do the counts. And if it happened to be a Republican who was being counted, it was a Democrat, by the way. Republicans rarely, if ever, objected. Except for this last time through, obviously. But if there was a Republican being counted for, every single time a state went to the Republican, one of the Democrat reps from their state stood up and screamed, "I object to the counting of this!" You know, election denialism, but it wasn't a bad thing back then. But it was mostly symbolic, as people have pointed out. It was a rubber stamp operation. While there were, at the time, and there are no longer, mechanisms for a vice president to question the results of an election, it was a very difficult thing to do, especially without Congress being involved in a majority fashion. The vice president couldn't do it himself, but what there wouldn't have been, and I don't know, again, if this is people were giving the Donald wrong information about this, is there is no constitutional mechanism to keep a president in power if he has not won the election past January the 20th. I don't know if this would have meant that we would have had no president. And again, this all being under the assumption that what they're accusing him of, number one, is true, and number two, he would have been successful. There is no mechanism for us to have a president who has not won the Electoral College past January the 20th. It just doesn't work. It's the same with like the MAGA religious people who come back out and tell you that, oh, we're going to go back and impeach Biden, we're going to impeach Harris too, and we're going to go back and install Trump back in. No, you're not, because there's no constitutional mechanism for it. I mean, God forbid if that actually did happen, not that they'd ever have the votes to remove, but if that ever did happen to happen, Kevin McCarthy would become the president. Wrap your head around that for just a second. That's a scary thought in and of itself. And now again, I don't know what Big Don knows about government and government procedure. That's been called into question from the moment that he descended the escalator. Whether he knew there was a constitutional mechanism or not, or whether somebody in his inner circle told him. Or maybe again, there was a plant on the inside that said, hey, you know, if this happens, then, you know, if there's no new president, then you have to stay in power. No, that's not how any of this works. Trump's claims of having won the election, said the indictment, were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. That's going to be a big hurdle to clear, by the way. They have to talk about this in the indictment and actually bring this forward, because two of the charges, and we'll read the charges as explained by DC Drano in a little bit. I'm sorry, 3 of the charges require intent. For sure. I think the 4th one does too. But they all require intent, which means that he has to know that they were false and was going to go do it anyway. And intent is going to be the hard bar to clear for these. But the defendant repeatedly and widely disseminated them anyway, to make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, to create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and to erode public faith in the admin of the election. Federal persecutors say Trump was determined to remain in power in conspiracies that targeted a bedrock function of the U.S. federal government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The indictment, the 3rd criminal case, I just had a completely terrifying thought. We'll go back to it in just a moment, but let me finish this paragraph. The indictment, the 3rd criminal case brought against the former president as he seeks to reclaim the White House in 2024, follows a long-running federal investigation into schemes by Trump and his allies to subvert the peaceful transfer of power and keep him in office despite a decisive loss to Biden. So, I was talking about the constitutional mechanism. You know what's actually terrifying? And this dawned on me as I was talking about McCarthy and him becoming the president. So, as I mentioned before, there actually is no constitutional mechanism for Trump to have stayed in office if the votes couldn't be counted. And if by some wild-ass conspiracy or anything else they couldn't have been counted, Biden couldn't have taken office either because his election wouldn't have been certified. So, Trump's term expired without a certified electoral result. Biden cannot come into office because there is no certified electoral result. At that moment in time, because especially given the fact that they hadn't had a vote for the speaker yet at this point, Nancy Pelosi would have assumed the presidency on January 20th. I just realized that as I was saying this. Because she would be the only person elected to her office in the line of succession. Trump is due in court on Thursday before U.S. Judge Tanya Chutkan, which I should have put some stuff about her on there because there are a lot of people who are saying that this is a slam dunk and she's got such a record of imprisoning January 6th rioters. She's an Obama appointee. Yeah, we've got some things here. I will add those to the stack in just a bit. So, that is the indictment. Let's actually look at the charges here. DC Drano doing a TLDR for us, which, I mean, I did read, but most people at this point have not. DC Drano, President Trump has been indicted on 4 federal counts. Conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of and attempted to obstruct an official proceeding. That charge can get just thrown the fuck right out right there because that's nullified by the other charge. And conspiracy against rights. So, conspiracy to defraud, conspiracy to obstruct, and conspiracy against rights. If we don't account obstruction and attempt to obstruct because it's, again, nullified by conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. All 3 of those charges require intent. The 4th one does too, but it doesn't count. It counts about the same point that Murder 2 and Man 3 cannot be convicted together unless you have an activist jury in the Twin Cities. Because Derek Chauvin somehow birthed both, intentionally killed in a moment of passion and unintentionally killed George Floyd at the exact same time. So all three of these require intent. That's going to be a big bar for the prosecution to come back out and clear. Now, saying that he did these things may not be as big of a bar to clear, especially given the emotional state of the country with the January 6th kangaroo court that was led by Democrats in the House. But intent, you have to prove that he knew that he won. Or that he lost, rather. And I don't necessarily believe that he knew that. I think that he knew that honk honk, something that I probably can't say on YouTube. I think he legitimately believed. What was important in this, and DC Draino also points out here, it's very important to note that he was not charged with seditious conspiracy or insurrection, which puts the 14th Amendment question off the table. Now, what they'll do with the Espionage Act and what that does, provided that sticks, this is going to be another story. But this takes, if we just look at these charges, again, insurrection and sedition off the table. 14th Amendment doesn't apply. He can still run for president. And they can still obtain the office of the presidency. Those two charges, if convicted by a leftist DC jury, would prohibit him from running in 2024. These charges are desperate acts from a desperate regime trying to do everything they can to stop the man that will hold them accountable in 2025. Well, see, I don't know about that either, because he had 4 years to do that and he didn't do it. I won't vote for him, but I know a lot of people will. I won't vote for him, but I know a lot of people will. I can hear my voice. I won't vote for him, but I know a lot of people will. I can hear my voice. I won't vote for him, but I know a lot of people... Shut up. Whenever you go check on the monitor at Kick, it always kicks the volume back on, and then puts yourself back into a loop. On-air production. Thank you, DC Draino, by the way, for TLDRing that. Let me look at what you guys are saying over here, because I haven't been paying attention over here. I've been just kind of going on in a rant for here for a while. Mogwai says Chris Christie's ready to serve. Oh, what? He's ready to be served. Sorry, he was at a McDonald's. I can go for some McDonald's right about now. Did I have some this past week? No, I had Taco Bell instead. Mogwai says Trump got a phone call after watching a weird video saying 7 days. Wrong reference for No Movie J. Edgar. No, I've seen that movie. It's not normally the kind of movie that I would see because I'm not into horror movies, but there's a girl I really liked. You'll figure out how the rest of that went. Silent Caster says democracy isn't the best system anyway, so I'm usually on the side of that's a good thing. Well, again, these people don't care about our democracy because they'll think that it's a threat to our democracy if... I'm not going to use the Donald for this one here, but... God, I can't believe I'm about to say this out loud because this terrifies the crap out of me in and of itself. If DeSantis, authoritarian DeSantis, gets in on a 70% landslide on the popular vote, it'll still be a threat to our democracy, to them, because, well, that'll be a threat to their hegemony. Silentcaster says, well, only BLM knows how to properly do fiery but mostly peaceful protests. And Antifa. Silentcaster votes Mog for president. Mogwai says no plants, but Marjorie is there and she can be considered a vegetable. No, she's a plant to begin with. Mogwai says, I remember that day and was really worried when Trump was quoted as saying, Pence is a member of the Rebel Alliance and traitor. Take him away. Pence is a member of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take him away. Silentcaster says, the threat on democracy is so ridiculous. Alright. Let's keep going. We got some more stuff to go on here. From NPC News, grand jury accuses Trump of conspiring to defraud the U.S. From Dora Gregorian and Ryan J. Riley. Former President Trump was indicted Tuesday on charges he conspired to defraud the country he used to lead and attempted to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power to Joe Biden. By the way, this is the second article that's mentioned that. The country that he used to lead. And this is a linguistic propaganda tactic. The solemnity that they're trying to instill into this office. It's almost a religious reverence to the office. Maybe not coming from NPC or the Associated Press, a religious reverence, but they definitely seem to want we the people to have a religious reverence to this office. And I understand that entirely. I mean, I used to have a religious reverence to that office myself. That stopped right around the W years. But unlike most other people who look to the government as their moral leaders, it never came back for me. The purpose of the conspiracy was to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election by using knowingly false claims of election fraud to obstruct the government function by which those results are collected, counted, and certified, the indictment from Special Counsel Jack Smith's office said. The indictment marks a historic moment for a nation less than 250 years old, the first time a former president has faced criminal charges for trying to overturn the bedrock of our hegemony, a free and honk-honk election. While Trump's failure to reverse his defeat was a credit to the guardrails of that hegemony, the ability to persecute him may renew the stress test on the constitutional design. Mogwai says Clinton had a religious experience in that office. Does that count? I don't know if Monica was that good, that Bill saw God, but I guess I've never experienced that either. Mogwai says, DeSantis is a good thing, sugar. Damn it, Lindsay, give me my phone. We don't talk about CDI Zelda over here. That doesn't exist on this channel. There was no CDI Zelda. The allegation that Trump used dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to subvert the 2020 election with pervasive and destabilizing lies about election fraud comes after a sprawling investigation that included testimony from dozens of White House aides and advisors, ranging in seniority up to former Vice President Mike Pence. The indictment accuses Trump of taking part in 3 criminal conspiracies to defraud the U.S. by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit, to obstruct the electoral vote process, to impede the January 6th congressional proceedings, at which the collected results of the presidential election are counted and certified, and against the right to vote, and to have that vote counted. He's due to be arraigned on the charges on Tuesday. I hope they get a mugshot this time. And NPC does have the full indictment, which we'll put in the chat in the Discord. If you want to read this article, except I put the Rumble link in by mistake. Let's try that again. Put that in the Discord as well. And it's in general chat if you guys want to go back and take a look at it. 45 pages, medium length read. Mostly legalese, of course. It'd probably take you a good hour to read. That's what it took me. Let's talk. We've got 2 different versions of NBC News. Merrick Garland speaking after the Trump indictment. Let's have a listen to him. And then we've got Jack Smith also speaking on this one here. And then some of the reaction as well. Oh, we need volume.
engaged in what has become the largest investigation in our history. In November last, I appointed Jack Smith as special counsel to take on the ongoing investigation in order to underline the department's commitment to accountability and independence. Mr. Smith and his team of experienced, principled career agents and prosecutors have followed the facts and the law wherever they lead. Any questions about this matter will have to be answered by the filings made in the courtroom.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
You know what's funny is he could probably answer any of the questions that they're launching at him, but a lot of that will reveal the hand that he had in it, which he is technically not supposed to have because it's supposed to be independent of him because, well, he was denied a seat for the Supreme Court by Trump. Remember that. Jack Smith speaking on this one as well from NBC News. I gotta refresh this one here. Let's have a listen to the special counsel.
Sealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, 2021 was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues. In this case, my office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens. In the meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law.
And by the way, if you read the reactions, and we've got one from one of the page shills, but it wasn't directly to this. But if you read the reactions to the page shills and the people who follow the page shills, at that last sentence, they all put their hands over their ears and said, la, 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 Trump is guilty, we don't have to be innocent until proven guilty, la, 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 I can't hear you.
I would like to thank the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are working on this investigation with my office, as well as the many career prosecutors and law enforcement agents from around the country who have worked on previous January 6th investigations. These women and men are public servants of the very highest order, and it is a privilege to work alongside them. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me bring in former U.S. Attorney.
All right. So that's his statement on there. And, like, he's got to pay lip service to innocent until proven guilty. He does. I don't think he believes it. Bring me the man and I'll show you the crime, so they say. But, of course, they're moving on to indict anybody else that they don't like. Guess whose name has come back up in all of this? Ginny Thomas. Notable page shill and questionable ethics holder around Dartmouth University, Jack Kosciarella. Could Ginny Thomas be a co-conspirator? And a lot of this is going to be they come back down to persecute anybody who now disagrees with them. That one paid one, what was it, Maury was his name? He posed the question of, how can we get back to unity in this country? And I said, well, your side probably thinks that it would start by executing everybody that disagrees with them. And just in case you forgot that this is happening as well, which they're going to probably hold off to until there's more stuff coming about from the Biden things, because that seems to be the pattern here. Security increased at Fulton County Courthouse ahead of possible Trump indictment. From Tyler Fingert and Fox 5 Atlanta Digital Team. Multiple law enforcement agencies are beefing up security at the Fulton County Courthouse ahead of a possible grand jury indictment of the former president and his Republican allies over efforts to overturn the then president's 2020 election loss, Hong Kong. Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis began investigating more than 2 years ago. Willis has strongly hinted that any indictment would come between now and August 18th. One of 2 grand juries seated July 11th is expected to hear the case. If any indictment came today, we would be ready, said Fulton County Sheriff Pat Labatt. Security planning preps are already underway for the indictment decision. That decision will put the Fulton County Courthouse on the national spotlight. Once again, a reminder, and this, by the way, goes for the DC courthouse too. If somebody in an online forum, in a chat room like the one that you're chatting in right now, or lurking in, depending on what you're doing, or in a Discord server, even one you've been in for a long time, or on 4chan for that matter, or any other number of places that people with opinions to the right of center tend to congregate, tell you that it's time to go to DC to protest, to go to Atlanta to protest. We have to show them, and I've already seen some of this on X. I can't believe I'm actually calling this X. I've already seen some of this over on Twitter. Or telling you that we need to make our voices heard, there needs to be retribution, or any of the other fun stuff that our friends on the left can get away with. Do not go. It is a trap, and you will be deceased. They have snipers waiting for you with a bullet with your name on it. And if you are not deceased by the end of it, you will be thrown into prison and face the same DA that is currently prosecuting the president or former president. Is that a DA that you want to face? It's not one that I want to face. Especially after sitting in solitary for 2 years. So, they're going to come out here and they're going to make a show of power over all this. We've got our fencing up, we've got our snipers up, we've got everything else. Do not go. Do not be anywhere near that courthouse when somebody in sunglasses, covering up one of their ears, says, "Hey son, throw this brick, you'll feel better." All right, we're going to do one more on presidential, and then we're going to transition. We are going to talk a little bit about Hunter and Devon Archer. I'm going to hold off on talking about the judge in the in this case. We'll maybe lead that. I think tomorrow's going to be a really slow news day. I do. So I'm going to hold off on some of this for tomorrow. All right. Political Magazine reporting a four-way race. The 2024 presidential contest is anything but settled. Yeah, I don't know about that. From Jonathan Martin. I'm pretty sure that the 2024 primary race for the Republican nomination is settled, unless they can do something with insurrection or the Espionage Act. What I'm going to tell you right now, no matter who wins both the primary and in November, the American people lose. To glimpse at the 2024 presidential race this summer, a year before the two nominating conventions, is to see a picture of predictability, the current president facing off against his predecessor, a rematch of the last election. Former President Trump is better positioned now to reclaim the Republican nomination than he has been at any time since he left office, and that prospect, along with a growing economy, has only strengthened President Biden's grip on his own party. What growing economy? Okay, I will give you credit, it's technically growing. But you can't crack 3%. You can't even crack 2.5% at this point. Yet placid surface waters can be deceptive. We're underestimating how turbulent the next year's campaign will be and how likely, on the current trajectory, it is to become a 3 or even 4-person race if voters are faced with a nearly 82-year-old incumbent who may not be able to fully serve a second term and a 78-year-old challenger who could be a felon by election day. Millions will seek a safer harbor. The possibility of Cornel West is dead in the water, but thanks for playing. Tapping into the youthful discontent with the president, claiming votes from Biden's left and moderate third-party candidate, offering an escape hatch for voters who grudgingly supported Biden in 2020, is already panicking senior Democrats. But these officials have taken solace in that, despite Biden's weak approval ratings, no elected Democrat has emerged to challenge the president in the primary. Yet that may no longer be a sure thing. Dean Phillips, a Minnesota moderate, has been receiving inquiries about his willingness to challenge Biden and is going to New York City next week to meet with Democratic donors about such a race, I'm told. So, Dean Phillips is ending his political career and will be marked a Nazi by his party, and a Russian asset, and a plant, and a pro-Trump shill by next week. Phillips, who is in his third term representing suburban Minneapolis, has drawn attention from contributors both denouncing the No Labels attempt to field a third-party ticket and calling for the contested Democratic primary next year. A former executive, he's also the sort of pro-business social moderate with private sector experience who corporate leaders usually pine for in a presidential candidate. Phillips, 54, is highly unlikely to mount a primary challenge unless Biden's health worsen or his political standing drops precipitously, I'm told, and does not want to further weaken the president. Yet he remains convinced that Democrats need a robust conversation about who to nominate and recognizes that more obvious would-be challengers in the party would not get in unless that somebody else first breaks into the political race, such as his fellow Minnesotan former Senator Eugene McCarthy did against Lyndon Johnson in 1968. McCarthy's candidacy eventually helped drive Johnson from the race, and yes, I know Biden allies, Republicans reclaimed the White House that fall. Democrats of a certain age, and even those younger, recall the painful history of that 1980 when Jimmy Carter spent the first half of the year fending off a primary challenger in Ed Kennedy before losing that fall to Ronald Reagan. Less well recalled is Reagan won an electoral college landslide, but more modest popular vote victory because third-party moderate John Anderson claimed support from voters afraid of the Republican challenge but lacking confidence in the Democrat incumbent. As long as Trump appears on track to be the GOP standard bearer, I think Biden would be insulated from any serious primary threat, sowing doubts about the incumbent is a luxury to most high-ranking Democrats, but verboten when the exiled strongman attempts to take back the power he fought to hold even in defeat. Honk, honk, honk. Yet there are two markers to watch by this fall, by which time any other Democrat would have gotten into the race: the president's fitness for the job and his approval numbers. Put less delicately, does Biden have more spills, as he did at the Air Force Academy? And does he finally get credit from voters for the improving economy, which is not improving? See, the issue with this is propagandistic, especially given the fact that we are in the midst of a foreign conflict, and a reminder that in order for a lot of the conflict that we're going into right now to stay above board and to even hold any relevance, means that Biden needs to project the strength that, hey man, I'm fiddle and I could do another term, man. Come on, just vote for me, man. They can't go back out and put somebody else in lest they admit on the foreign stage that Biden doesn't have what it takes to handle. They're between a rock and a hard place because Biden does not have what it takes to handle any of this. Is he uniparty a shill? Like, we all know that he is. Cornel West is going to go nowhere because, again, the people who are funding that wing of the political spectrum, number one, are going to cut funding and brand him as a Nazi sympathizer and a Trump supporter. And number two, and this is the most important part, have already run with the propaganda of any vote for anybody other than Biden is a vote for Trump. They're all in on this. They cannot change course on this without betraying the country to whoever the Republican nominee is. And yes, on the other side of it, the biggest problem with what the GOP is trying to do on the other side is McCarthy, who is being optioned as another option for the presidency. I ran on the culture wars and the religious side, DeSantis. I did a Jesus speech in Iowa, Scott, and I shut down a bridge, Christie. 3 people that the biggest voting bloc in the Republican Party will not vote for. And a 4th one that they're not real fond of either. I want to remind you, at this point, as much as I don't want Donald to be the president again, and as the current field sits right now, when election day comes up next year, I'm staying the fuck home. But as I will remind you, the biggest voting bloc in the Republican Party is union and lower to lower middle class Democrats who were cast aside for the progressive agenda that Barack Obama brought through. The vast majority of MAGA, and that's why they act that way that they do at the rallies too, by the way. The vast majority of MAGA was former Obama voters who were disillusioned by the fact that he said basically, well, go find yourself a different job because that job that you had, that's not coming back. Which puts us politically in a very interesting position. None of these 4 men can garner the votes because they can't appeal to MAGA. Whereas the supporters of this man and a couple people who are on a hope and a prayer for these two will, at the end of time, hold their nose and say, okay, Donald, do it again. We can't have 4 more years of Biden. Well, most of them will, not all of them. Because the Donald and his followers can't help themselves from going back and insulting them. But the vast majority of the supporters of this man are vote red or we'll all be dead. So do keep that in mind. This is a very, very interesting position right now because, again, number one, of how the voting bloc fell on the Republican side, but number 2, how the Democrat side has backed themselves into a corner. I don't know. The only thing I know is I'm not going out on election day. Fuck that. Let's see. Soundcaster says, no, he believes innocent until I can prove him guilty. Mogwai says, I heard the Georgia prosecutor has indicted a Big Mac for January 6th. Yeah, and it was actually sentenced to death. I ate it. Mogwai says, Will you meet me in Fulton County in a few days? I need a human shield. Protest buddy. Asking Silentcaster. Silentcaster says, I'm sure you can ask MTG. She's from that state. And her district is actually not that far from Atlanta either. I've been through Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. Mogwai says, a tumor is growing. It doesn't mean it's a good thing. It's fair. Caster says, I would joke about a tumor growing between my legs, but since that's actually happened to me, it's just not as funny. No, self-deprecation is still funny. Mogwai says, MTG turned me down. She's going with Butthead. Matt Gaetz. Mogwai says, I wish Ted Kennedy was still alive. He'd be a great Uber/Lyft. I need a little sound report so I can do the rim shot for that one. Crack, rock, and dementia case. I tried watching a Pence speech. I think it was technically dead for 3 minutes. Mogwai says, Ross Perot, where are you when we all need you? He's flapping his ears and flying away somewhere else at some point. Alright, let's talk about Devon Archer and Hunter Biden and a back-to-back pair from the Daily Wire. Democrat demands release of Devon Archer transcript. GOP-led panel responds. Well, I actually think that transcript needs to be out there. In fact, the recording, I think, needs to be out there. Because otherwise it's filtered through dishonest journalists. And I'll be the one that comes out and says, I don't know what's in there. All I know is what people have told me. It is hearsay from me. From Daniel Chayton. The GOP-led House Oversight Committee delivered a combative response to Democrat who demanded the release of the transcript from an interview with former business partner of Hunter, the son of President Joe. Dan Goldman, a member of the panel who served as lead counsel in the first Trump impeachment, disputed characterizations his Republican colleagues have made about the closed-door interview with Devon Archer on Monday and urged Chairman Jim Comer to put out a transcript during an appearance on CNN. Lawmakers have said Archer divulged that Hunter put his father, then Vice President, on speaker for roughly 20 times during the meetings with business associates to sell the brand and the illusion of access. While Comer went as far as to say Archer's testimony confirms Joe Biden lied to the American people when he said he had no knowledge of his son's business dealings and was not involved, Goldman insisted the conversations were purely casual, focusing on innocuous topics such as the weather, and argued that the transcript would not lead to anyone to believe the elder Biden benefited financially from his son's dealings. Let's listen.
The Republican head of the Oversight Committee issued this statement that reads, in part, Devon Archer's testimony today confirms Joe Biden lied to the American people when he said he had no knowledge about his son's business dealings and was not involved. Joe Biden was, quote, the brand, end quote, that his son sold around the world to enrich the Biden family. In a statement a short time ago, the White House counsel's office said the testimony appeared to debunk Republicans' allegations. Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman was in the closed-door hearing. He joins me now. Congressman Goldman, appreciate you joining us. You said there was no evidence of wrongdoing on the part of President Biden. Do you think it was appropriate for Hunter Biden allegedly to be selling even an illusion of access to his father?
I don't think that's an accurate description, and I would urge Chairman Comer, rather than to continue to send out misinformation about what transpired in the transcribed interview, to actually put out the transcript, which he can do as soon as he wants. Because I think anyone who reads that transcript, and I was there, so I can tell you what happened, would come away from that believing that Joe Biden had nothing to do with Hunter Biden's business dealings, derived no benefit from it, received no money, and did not know about anything that Hunter Biden was doing, nor did he ever discuss it with Hunter Biden or the business associates. The fact.
After Goldman repeated his demand in a post to X, the verified account for the House Oversight Committee fired back. Democrats can't explain President Biden's lies about him talking with Hunter's business associates, so now they're pretending not to know how congressional transcripts work, the panel said. Goldman was a staffer not long ago and knows that every transcribed interview goes through the same process. First, we need to receive it from the court reporters. We haven't yet. and then the witness gets the chance to review it, the committee added. Once that process has happened, we will release the transcript. Also, no one believes Joe only talked about the weather. Well, and again, we do need to go back in and it's got to go through the proper channels, because there might be classification in there somewhere. But I don't doubt that this is going to come out. The power of red tape and the slowdown of government bureaucracy. It's going to be a while before we see this, but I have no doubt that we are going to at some point. I'm a little disappointed by the fact that they speculated like that before it came out. Another one here, and an interesting point off this one here. CNN contributor triggers liberal panel. It's not Republicans who made Hunter Biden into a complete scumbag, from Virginia Kruta. CNN contributor Scott Jennings triggered his fellow panelists during a Sunday morning segment when he said in plain language what he thought of President Biden's embattled son Hunter. Jennings, a conservative political commentator, joined State of the Union guest host Casey Hunt and Democratic strategist Michael LaRosa, and when the conversation turned to the president's recent acknowledgement of his seventh grandchild, Jennings let the Biden family have it. Let's listen.
You know, ultimately, the Bidens are a real family just like everyone else.
Sure, but Scott Jennings, the president has made being a family man a central part of his political identity.
It's not Republicans, with all due respect, who made Hunter Biden into a complete scumbag on this and other issues. The ignoring his own daughter for 4 years, and the President of the United States hanging up a stocking for the dog, and not for his seventh grandchild.
Okay, look, we can also have sympathy for people who are struggling with addiction. Let's keep this conversation respectful.
Listen, I totally agree. And you know where I'm from, a lot of families deal with addiction. And you know who ends up picking up the pieces? The grandparents. And in this case, the grandparents would not acknowledge this little girl. It is offensive. But the bottom line is...
But they have now.
Oh, what a hero. The polling must have been brutal.
Just
the polling must have been brutal.
No one's ever questioned the heart and integrity of Joe Biden as a family man and as a human being, and the pain and suffering and loss that man has been through, including the struggles he deals with.
Yeah, I mean, Hunter... He's been a problem for a long time, and he's had trouble for a long time. And, you know, Daddy comes out and picks up the pieces for him for a long time. But, like, Jim Comer didn't put the crack pipe in his mouth. And Ronnie Reagan didn't go back out and give him all sorts of foreign business dealings with questionable ties. A lot of this he did himself. All right, we got to move on and talk about some other things here. Ray Epps stuff from the Daily Beast. Ray Epps' attorneys fired back at Rogan's January 6th false flag absurdity. Kind of does make me wonder what who Joe had on and what he was talking about recently, because, again, I don't really care to listen to Rogan all the time. I think he's tiresome, but if he's got an interesting guest, I'll listen to it. I listened to the RFK interview on the way back from Georgia a few weeks ago. Interesting interview. I think that RFK is a nut job even more than I did before after listening to that. But the fact that Joe sat there and listened, heard him out, and pushed back as needed to be, and really got the nut job out into the open so we could see it. The thing with Rogan is, like, so many people, because he entertains so much and so many different kinds of people, that he must be a Nazi because he'll let the Nazis come in and speak their entire mind. Dude, he lets people come out there and put everything out there and lets the people decide. No matter how wild and crazy their theories are, it's out in the open, and you can review it for yourself. Most people don't. They just take whatever is filtered to them through a news program. But So yeah, there's somebody controversial that I want to know what they actually think about something. I'll listen to the Rogan interview about it instead of listening to it filtered through CNN. All right, but this is on Epps. Ray Epps, the former Trump acolyte. Dude, that guy was never a Trump guy. At the center of a wild right-wing conspiracy theories about January the 6th is pushing back against the absurdity of Rogan's claim that he clearly instigated the Capitol Selfie Fest and helped federal government orchestrate a false flag. During a broadcast of the Joe Rogan Experience, they misspelled that on purpose, by the way, last week. They said experiment, for those of you listening on the audio platform. The conspiracy peddling comic once again pushed the unfounded claim that Epps was an undercover agent for the FBI, who purposely incited MAGA supporters to storm the Capitol in an effort to damage then-President Trump. Yeah, no, he only said, "We have to go inside the Capitol." Look, the January 6th thing, it's bad, but also the intelligence agencies were involved in provoking people into the Capitol building. That's a fact, Rogan declared before invoking unfounded theories about Epps' supposed involvement. Who was on Rogan? I don't know, let's read the response. Last month, Epps filed a defamation suit against Fox, claiming the conservative cable giant and former Fox News star Tucker Carlson commenced a years-long campaign spreading falsehoods about him and destroyed his life, making him a scapegoat. For the January 6th attack, Carlson, in particular, regularly insinuated on his primetime show that Epps was an informant for the feds who helped stage manage the Selfie Fest. In a statement to the Daily Beast on Tuesday, Epps' attorney, Michael Teeter, blasted Rogan for breathing more life into the groundless allegations that Carlson initially made popular on the right. Joe Rogan's recent comments show that the staying power and consequences of Fox's and Tucker's lies about Ray Epps, Teeter said. For years, Fox targeted Ray and spread falsehoods about him and Fox's viewers, used the lies as a basis to harass and threaten Ray. He added the absurdity of the conspiracy theory does not stand in the way of being spread and weaponized to harm Ray. If Mr. Rogan is truly interested in focusing on who instigated the attack on the Capitol, he would find more truth in looking at the mirror than he does in focusing on a wedding venue owner from Arizona. Well, here's the question. And this goes out to Mr. Teeter, who's probably never going to hear this. And Mr. Rogan, Mr. Epps, who's probably never going to take up the mantle. And I don't know if Joe, by the way, has ever reached out in this way, but I think he should. Have Epps on and have him tell his side of the story for 3 hours. Because again, just like I said with Joe Rogan, he has this uncanny ability to get people to say the things, even sometimes the quiet part, out loud. Go on the show, Epps. Explain your side of the story. It's never going to happen, but go ahead and do it. Alright, the light bulb thing. If you want an incandescent light bulb, now's the time to go get it. I will come back out and say I have no interest in ever having an incandescent light bulb again. Because I saw my electric bill after I switched everything to LED, and I have absolutely no interest in having it at all. But I would never stop anybody else who does have an interest in doing it. If that's your preference, the free market will decide whether or not it needs to be on the shelf. For most people at this point, that's not their preference. The free market will legitimately, by the way, put the incandescent light bulb out of its misery. I hate to tell you this, because again, they're energy heavy. They don't last for very long. You buy them all the time. And at this point, LEDs, the last time I went in and did a big buy of LEDs, they were $10 a bulb. And I bought enough to do everything in the little place that I lived in Redacted, which was 8. They're like $2 a bulb now. And for the most part, you buy them once at $2 a bulb. But again, the free market can eliminate CFCs and incandescent bulbs easily, because there is no risk that outweighs the cost at this point. There are people that still like the incandescent. My friend Stephanie is one of them. I think it's tremendously stupid to want incandescent light bulbs, but I will never ever try to stop somebody from doing it, and I will definitely never use the government to try to stop somebody from doing it. But Biden admin begins enforcing nationwide light bulb bans, igniting backlash from GOP liberal fantasies. From Thomas Catenacci. The Biden admin will begin enforcing a nationwide ban on various types of popular light bulbs on Tuesday as part of its aggressive energy efficiency agenda. Under the DOE's regulations, manufacturers and retailers will be prohibited from selling incandescent and similar halogen light bulbs, which represent a sizable share of the current light bulb supplies. Instead, manufacturers and retailers must sell light-emitting diode or LED alternatives or risk substantial federal penalties. It's impossible for Democrats to leave us alone. States must fight back. Representative Bob Good of Virginia tweeted ahead of the ban enforcement. President Biden continues to push liberal fantasies through his weaponized federal agencies. Andy Barr of Kentucky added, "The Department of Energy should be focused on American energy independence, not what light bulbs you can or cannot purchase for your home or business." Again, at $2 a bulb, it's really hard for me to understand why people want to keep buying incandescents that last a few months at a time and you have to replace all the time. But again, I'm not going to stand in somebody's way if that's what they prefer. I'm just going to keep buying more and more LEDs. In April 2022, months after first proposing the rulemaking, the Department of Energy finalized regulations prohibiting certain light bulbs over the low energy efficiency levels. According to the DOE announcement, the regulations are projected to save consumers an estimated $3 billion a year on utility bills and cut carbon emissions by 222 million metric tons over the next 3 decades. So, you can't have your gas dishwasher or your clothes washer or your gas dryer or your gas generator or your gas water heater, and now your incandescent light bulb is on the chopping block too. Freedom, I'm telling you. From the Associated Press. In a move that is entirely political, Biden decides to keep Space Command in Colorado, rejecting a move to Alabama. From Lolita C. Baldor and Tara Kopp. President Brandon has been decided to keep the U.S. Space Command headquarters in Colorado, overturning a last-ditch decision by the Trump admin to move it to Alabama. The choice ended months of thorny deliberations, but an Alabama lawmaker vowed to fight on. U.S. officials told the Associated Press on Monday that Biden was convinced by the head of Space Command, General James Dickinson, who argued that moving his headquarters now would jeopardize military readiness. Dickinson's view, however, was in contrast to Air Force leadership, who studied the issue at length and determined that relocating to Huntsville was the right move. If I remember correctly, Huntsville gets snow in winter, but not as much as Colorado does. But again, the last time I was down south for a Christmas, I spent the entire week in a t-shirt because it was 75 degrees in Atlanta that weekend, or that week. It's funny, I left the top of the hill at my dad's house in Redacted, and it was minus 16 at 4 o'clock in the morning that morning. It was 16 below zero at 4 o'clock in the morning. And at 9 o'clock Eastern time, when I got rolled into Atlanta, to the Zed compound, it was 75 degrees. U.S. officials told the Associated Press on Monday that Biden was convinced by the head of Space Command, Jim Dickinson, who argued that moving his headquarters now would jeopardize military. Oh, I read that one already. The official spoke on condition of anonymity to provide details of Biden's rationale for the decision. Well, the details of the rationale are, screw you, Tuberville. In announcing the plans, Brigadier General Pat Ryder, Pentagon press secretary, said the decision was based on an objective and deliberate process informed by data and analysis. He said Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin supported the president's decision because he's a yes man. Reaction to the decision came fast and was sharply divided as Colorado lawmakers praised it and Alabama officials slammed it. As a political maneuver, this fight is far from over, warned Mike Rogers of Alabama, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. Which, I mean, it's good, by the way, that Colorado lawmakers are praising this. As much as I do think that it was probably the right decision to take it out to Alabama, I am glad that the Colorado lawmakers are fighting to keep those jobs and that revenue in their state. And yes, absolutely, Tommy Tuberville and Mike Rogers should be fighting for this as well, because that's a lot of revenue that could be brought to their state. New taxpayers in the forms of spacemen. Yes, that's actually the term for them. And officers. Building facilities, construction. There's a lot of jobs that can be brought out to Alabama. Which, if I understand correctly, has been in a deficit for quite a while, even, again, before the pandemic. And I think this would have been the right move for a lot of people, especially, again, given the fact that there's such a milder winter in Colorado than there is, in Alabama than there is in Colorado. Just because of the latitude in and of itself. But yes, I'm glad to see that the Colorado lawmakers are fighting for this. And in reality, this was just a move to snub Tuberville. Let's grab one from the Daily Wire. This is an op-ed from Joseph Curl. Is Kamala Harris actively campaigning against Joe Biden? Before I read this, I'm going to say probably not, because all she needs to do is walk behind him on the stairs. From Joseph Curl. During the first 3 years of Saturday Night Live, way back in the 70s, the cast included Belushi, Chevy Chase, Gilda Radner, Dan Aykroyd, Jane Curtin, and Lorraine Newman. Those were the days, by the way. They'd all go on to become megastars, but back then, the 20-something nobodies were known as the not ready for primetime players. Even though it's more than half a century later, you can add one more member of the not ready for primetime players, Vice President Harris. Well known for her word salads, the former federal prosecutor was unable to speak extemporaneously. I question whether or not, by the way, that's legitimate, because she didn't start having that until she became the vice president. One thing that I will give her, she was shady, underhanded. She was a lawyer, and a prosecuting lawyer on top of that, but she was well-spoken in the Senate. I don't give Kamala Harris a lot of credit for a lot of things, but she was very well-spoken in the Senate. And then all of a sudden, now that she's the vice president, I don't know if it's her speechwriter or if it's just the pressure of the job or what it is. I have a hard time believing it's the pressure of the job, as eloquent as she was. But then she comes in and she talks about the speech, and the speech is her speaking. And she speaks in a speech, which she gives to the people, and the people are gathered as a group of more than one person. That is not the same person who stood extemporaneously on the Senate floor and said, "Mr. Kavanaugh, who'd you talk to?" Some of this is me wondering if she's playing Casey at the bat and acting like she's easy to defeat so Republicans want her on the ticket or something. I don't know, but I have a hard time believing that the person in the Kavanaugh hearings was the same person that's the vice president right now. The Veep shoved both her feet in her mouth last week with one of her worst verbal blunders of her vice presidency. Understand that across our country, how many people cannot afford to live where they work and have to commute to work, sometimes hours at a time, driving over bridges and roads that are falling apart. What that means in terms of a flat tire, What that means in terms of coming out of pocket because your car insurance doesn't cover it, Harris said at a private campaign fundraising event in Chicago. Then she dropped the bombshell. And the average American is a $400 unexpected offense away from bankruptcy, she declared. Which, by the way, everybody in this country knows. Except for the paid, well, even the paid shills know that, but they're still trying to tell you we have a great economy. So hang on, Harris is in some massive mansion surrounded by a bunch of fat cat money bags trying to persuade them to drop big bucks into the campaign 2024. And she tells them average Americans are just $400 from disaster. How out of touch can she be? Does she not realize the Biden-Harris admin has made things so? With soaring inflation, sky-high gas prices on their way to $4 again, food prices soaring, and home interest rates the highest since the 90s. She clearly doesn't. In another speech at Drake in Des Moines, Harris said, most Americans are just one expected expense away from bankruptcy. The White House recently claimed that Bidenomics has created more than 13 million jobs, false, including nearly 800,000 manufacturing jobs, false. America has experienced the strongest growth among leading economies since the pandemic. Well, that's technically true, but that's like saying you're the prettiest horse in the glue factory. Inflation has consistently declined over the past 11 months, false. Plummeting by more than half, false. A statement from the admin declared. But that's just half the story since Biden took office in January 2021 when a gallon of gas cost $2.39, which was still outrageous. Now the nationwide average is $3.78 and rising. Food prices at the grocery store soared 11% between 2021 and 2022, and car prices, forget about it. New car prices soared about 24%. Harris's frank admission to the slip past sharp-eyed wags on social media, who commented on the state of the U.S. economy, including one 2024 presidential candidate. Yeah, that's called Bidenomics, and it's a problem, wrote Tim Scott. Americans have lost $10,000 in spending power because of the Biden-Harris agenda. So, and realistically too, Harris is coming out and trying to play the plight of the poor to buy votes. Why she's doing it in front of a bunch of fat cat donors, I can't begin to tell you. People who will never have to experience that to begin with. But again, it stands in sharp contrast to what the Biden admin is telling us, that everything is fantastic and your wages totally kept up with inflation. Alright, where are we at? 133, we got some time yet. From the Daily Mail, Greg Abbott defends building floating border on the Rio Grande to try to slow migrants from crossing the border. From Sophie Mann. Greg Abbott staunchly defended his decision to install a floating border wall along the Rio Grande in an attempt to keep illegal migrants from entering the state. I will do whatever I have to defend our state from the invasion of the Mexican drug cartels and others who have tried to come into our country illegally. And I will protect our sovereignty, the three-term Republican leader of the Lone Star State told the state's Republican county chairs on Friday. Abbott installed a nearly 1,000-foot line of large, bright orange buoys that create a divide in the river that separates the U.S. from Mexico. Recently, Biden's DOJ filed a suit to have the floating border removed, arguing it's illegal and raises both humanitarian and environmental concerns. Again, I would point out that if you put a sign up there that says peligroso and say that there's sharp shit underneath the water, you would take a lot of the air out of the DOJ's defense in this, but I mean, who has time for rational thinking? But so far, Abbott's refused to remove the barriers. The improvised border was installed near Eagle Pass, a city thought to be a primary entry point for illegal border crossings. The solution to an ongoing issue also allows authorities to move in and extend the floating border to cover hotspots where migrants are sneaking into the U.S. It's called Operation Hold the Line, and they're holding the line and ensuring that nobody enters the state of Texas illegally, said Abbott. Despite the DOJ's suit, which calls the floating border an unlawful construction, the southern governor has no plans to remove it. He gave me a lawsuit, and by God, Joe Biden, we will see you in court, said Abbott with a conviction. I challenged the federal government to show they've spent that much money in the state of Texas on the border under Joe Biden as president, he added. As the suit was filed early last week, Associated AG Vanita Gupta said, "We allege that Texas has flouted federal law by installing a barrier in the Rio Grande without obtaining the required federal authorization." She added that Abbott's move has prompted diplomatic objections from Mexico. And as I explained the first time we talked about this, that's probably technically true, given the fact that the Rio Grande Valley and the US-Mexico border in and of itself is already a political release valve for a Mexican government that is in dire need of a revolution. But they can sit back and abuse their people and destroy their economy and all the other things that they can, and the dissidents, instead of fighting back, just slip up over the US border. So that one's going to go to court. Again, federal court, so we're not going to get any video of this, so we're not going to see this except for what's filtered through the mainstream news. Let's talk about the credit rating. This one dropping just immediately before the show started today. U.S. credit rating downgraded from AAA by Fitch. Imagine being the private company that tells the publicly traded U.S. government that they suck at managing their money, by the way. How do I get to be on Fitch? From Benjamin Purvis. The U.S. was stripped of its top-tier sovereign credit rating by Fitch Ratings, echoing a move that made more than a decade ago by S&P. The credit assessor downgraded the U.S. from AAA, a ranking that the nation has held at Fitch since at least '94. According to data compiled by Bloomberg, the move comes in the wake of major political battles over the nation's borrowing and repeated standoffs over raising the debt limit. While the most recent legislative impasse was resolved, it remains a potential issue of concern going forward. Yes, because there's a taste to actually freeze that and keep our debt under that limit. Because that number gets bigger and scarier. And I mean, that's been a thing in like social studies and social problem classes since I was in middle school, and probably before. I remember being in Miss Key's class and talking about this, and that was in 7th grade. And that was at a brief point, by the way, when the national debt was going down. Because for once in our nation's godforsaken history, we had a balanced budget. It's one of the few things that Bill actually did well. And then we put another war on the credit card. Thanks, W. That statement right there is why I laugh when people think that I'm a Republican, by the way. The rating downgrade of the U.S. reflects the expected fiscal deterioration over the next 3 years, a high and growing general government debt burden, and the erosion of governance relative to a AA and AAA rated peers over the last 2 decades that has manifested in repeated debt limit standoffs and last-minute resolutions, Fitch said in a statement. Well, that's part of the thing, is that they do the last-minute solutions so that the opposition, and this goes both ways, by the way. I'm not just going to be picking on Democrats for this one, because I have seen John Boehner do the exact same thing. Is that they hold it hostage until the very last minute. And they do the same thing with like government shutdowns and everything, because it's supposed to make the other side cave. And give into all demands instead of just one. I mean, we saw the rhetoric in the last debt ceiling. Yeah, we're not allowed to negotiate with our debt. It's unconstitutional, it's illegal, and it's treasonous to negotiate with our debt. You're holding our economy hostage. We saw the rhetoric. Boehner did the same thing with Obama. Reid did the same thing with W. And forget who the Republican was that did the same thing with Bill, by the way. But I mean, this is something that's been going on since at least Nixon, and probably before that. Have a problem, bring it down to the very last minute. The internet news cycle has made it even worse because it lets people go back at each other's throats over it on the ground and on the grassroots side, with the attempt that if you wait until the last minute to address it at all, then it means the other side will come back and cave to your demands, rather than letting the debt default or unpaid bills or this or that or the next thing. Whereas if you're doing it right at the beginning, oh, well, my opponent might want to do some give and along with some take. Let's talk about Twitter, now known as X. From The Hill, X threatens to sue nonprofit that tracks hate speech on platform. This is one, by the way, that I found as I was getting started and I have not had a chance to read into, but I'm curious about. From Rebecca Klahr. X, the company formerly known as Twitter, threatened to sue a nonprofit organization that was tracking the spread of hate speech on the platform, the organization said on Monday. The Center for Countering Digital Hate, an organization that also tracks online hate speech and misinformation, sent a letter Monday to Alex Spiro, an attorney that represents X owner Elon Musk, cautioning the company against any further attempts to threaten or intimidate our clients. The letter also asked X to preserve all documents and other information related to the disinformation and hate speech on the platform. The CCDH said it received a letter earlier this month from Spiro threatening to sue over allegations of misleading claims about Twitter. The letter targets study the CCDH posted in June that found that Twitter failed to act on 99% of the hate posted by subscribers to Twitter Blue, the paid feature that lets users purchase verification marks. Spiro's letter called the claims false, misleading, or both, and argued that the CCDH intends to harm Twitter's business by driving advertisers away from the platform with incendiary claims, which, I mean, has been a thing since they started doing this. Attorneys representing the CCDH called the letter ridiculous and doubled down on the research cited in the report. They also pointed out that the CCDH regularly published reports about other social media platforms, including rival platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. CCDH Executive Officer Imran Ahmed said in a statement that Musk's actions represent a brazen attempt to silence honest criticism and independent research in the desperate hope that he can stem the tide of negative stories and rebuild his relationship with the advertisers. Well, the thing with the advertisers, and we got to talk about Niger, by the way, tomorrow too, because I've been ignoring that for a couple days. But the thing with this, and the thing with hate speech on Twitter, is, and I like to think that I'm maybe insulated from a lot of this because I don't see a lot of it as much as they say that it's all there, which I do believe because I have witnessed Reddit threads full of leftoids who said that as soon as Musk takes over, we're going to post the N-word everywhere. We've all built up a number of bot accounts, and we can switch between them at a moment's notice and start posting the N-word because that's going to make the advertisers flee, and Musk will fail because evil right-wing Nazi cannot be allowed to do free speech, and he's going to cause an insurrection and Donald Trump to be reelected and dogs and cats to live together and sin. So for a company like CCDH to come back out and say, yeah, look, all this hate speech that we found, whether or not it's either true or whether it's staged so they can find it, Because Africa Man bad. I'm not surprised. I'd like to see discovery on something like this before I make a final judgment on it, but I can leave it at I'm not surprised. From the Daily Mail, got just a couple more here. Nashville Christian school shooter Audrey Hale had mysterious notes on clothing when she started shooting. From Noah Hulf for DailyMail.com. The Nashville school shooter Audrey Hale had a mysterious handwritten notes on her clothes, a knife inscribed with her chosen name of Aiden, and an anklet with the number 508407 etched on it, an autopsy report revealed. The report came 4 months after the transgender shooter opened fire at the Covenant School, killing 3 adults and 3 children, on March 27th. The autopsy revealed that Hale's clothing was covered in handwritten words, drawings, and numbers. It's unclear what was written on her clothes. The report also noted that Hale wore an orange plastic anklet with the mysterious inscription 508407. The autopsy was released as debate escalated over the decision to release the manifesto and other writings of Hale, which were recovered at the crime scene and at her parents' home. Again, it's not an accident that she went into this wearing a red hat, by the way, just so you know. The report noted Hale identified as transgender man but was listed as female officially. The medical examiner determined Hale's cause of death to be homicide by gunshot wounds. The tox analysis found no detection of drugs or alcohol. So, and I mean, we've got the review of what happened here on that day and everything, which was horrendous and horrific. But with Hale being dead, we're never going to get any answers. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2, of course, is I do believe that this shooting was intended to go much, much further. And I would not be surprised if people were told to surrender. Officers were told to surrender and hold back, and just some of them looked at this and said, these are kids, we're going to do it anyway. As far as the numbers and letters, one of the things that I will point out the fact that these are mysterious to those of us who see them. I don't know what 508407 is, but I bet you I know where we could find that information. That mysterious document that can never get released and never be seen by the American people. That so many people have demanded. And again, if that was full of complaints about the Jays and the blacks and anything else like that, that would be front page story. It would accidentally get released as a PDF. While the PDF viewers struggled so quickly to get it taken down. As fast as they can. Oh no, we definitely can't let anybody read this. But you know where the information on this handwritten notes is going to be, and probably that this number here, it's going to be in that manifesto that you're never going to see. From WGN9, local Chicago leaders advocate for immigration and work permit reform. From Bernac, Tumulty, and Eli Ang. The League of United Latin American Citizens spoke out in support of a measure being pushed for by the U.S. Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia. We held a press conference to thank Garcia for taking leadership, asking for the undocumented workers here in America, said Cecilia Garcia, newly elected state director of the LULAC, that they have a way to legalization and have a status without fear of being deported. Earlier this month, dozens of congressmen and women sent a letter to Biden urging him to expand work authorizations to both new migrants and those who have been in the U.S. for years, working and paying taxes with no path to a permit. Whether they arrived days ago or decades ago, people need to provide for the families and they want to work, Chuy Garcia said. For Cecilia, it's a topic that's personally affected her as well. Her own husband was undocumented and deported hours after getting pulled over in a traffic stop. My life has never been the same, Cecilia Garcia said. Now I'm a single mother of 5 beautiful children. Cecilia says that she believes allowing people who are already here to work illegally without living in fear is the right move for everybody. Well, again, I have little sympathy for this because, especially with our open door policy right now, hit the entry point, Borders of Customs and Border Patrol will hand you your court date for 10 years down the road, asylum status, and papers that will make you semi-legal until your court date. And I don't know what, by the way, Cecilia's husband's story is. If he swam across the Rio Grande, or if he went through a fairly open space in New Mexico or California, or Arizona for that matter. I don't know what his story is, but I'd be willing to bet that if he got deported after a traffic stop, that it was not him coming to the port of entry. I will eat my words if I'm wrong, by the way. Because I do understand the fact that there is a large amount of overstay of visa. As much as our friends to the right would like you to say that everybody who's here illegally went and swam across the Rio Grande, the actual vast majority of immigration violations are overstayed visas. You come in, you get on a work visa or a student visa, and then you just stay and stick around. That ratio is probably changing and getting closer to 50-50, given our open border policy right now. But our majority is still in the fact that it's overstayed visas, not necessarily people who are just running in and over. So, realistically, I would need more information on this one to make some sort of jump. But I mean, WGN's not going to give you the full story. They're going to give you what fits the narrative. It's WGN after all. And the last one, surprising absolutely nobody. From the Washington Post, where democracy goes to die in darkness. Twitter rival Mastodon, rife with child abuse material, study finds. From Cristiano Lima, which the fact that this is in the Washington Post and not Conservative Brief or something like that is, I mean, this blows my mind that this is in the Washington Post. Because Mastodon is Omar Riviera's site, who is adjacent to the Occupy Democrats. Let's see. A new report has found rampant child sexual abuse material on Mastodon, a social media site that's gained popularity in recent months as an alternative to platforms like Twitter and Instagram. Researchers say the findings raise major questions about the effectiveness of safety efforts across so-called decentralized platforms, which let users join independently run communities that set their own moderation rules, particularly in dealing with the internet's most vile content. During a 2-day test, researchers at the Stanford Internet Observatory found over 600 pieces of known or suspected child abuse material across some of Mastodon's most popular networks, according to a report shared exclusively with the Technology 202. Researchers reported finding their first piece of content containing child exploitation within 5 minutes. They would go on to uncover roughly 2,000 uses of the hashtags associated with such material. David Thiel, one of the report's authors, called it an unprecedented sum. We get more photo DNA hits in a 2-day period than we've probably had in the entire history of our organization of doing any kind of social media analysis, and it's not even close, said Thiel, referring to a technique used to identify pieces of content with unique digital signatures. Mastodon did not return a request for comment. What's bothersome about this, aside from the actual kitty diddling stuff, is the fact that this was touted as the most stable and most anticipated alternative to Twitter. For left-wingers only, and anybody who had any sort of inkling of right-wing thought. It was supposed to be banned from Twitter. It was supposed to be your safe space from any sort of right-wing thought. And yet, that is the first thing that people find. And it's, again, this is not something that's being reported in the Daily Wire or the Blaze or Conservative Brief or anything like that. This is the Washington Post. One of the most liberal outlets in this country reporting on this. I have friends, by the way, who have gone on to every single social media platform as they come out, no matter what, to reserve their names. And I have done the same on several other ones. Like, I have a Parler I've never posted to. I have a Gab, which I cannot stand Gab, but I reserved my name, so nobody can go on a Gab and pretend to be me. And I didn't do this with Tribble or Mastodon because, number one, I knew that I'd be banned almost immediately by joining both of them. And anybody who's on there pretending to be me, by the way, will be banned almost immediately because of who I am. And I'm not even that right-wing. But I'm against Joe Biden, which means that I must be MAGA. Their rules, not mine. So I didn't even try with these two, and you know, I'm really glad that I didn't, and I do know people that did, just again, to reserve the name. And reserve their brand. And it's horrendous, and I hope the thing gets shut down. I do not normally advocate for government intervention and shutting down a platform, but if this is as freewheeling with kiddie stuff as this report says that it is, shut it down. I do not mess around when it comes to kids. Shut it down. Shut it down, burn down the offices where they were, and salt the earth where the offices stood. If they really have this much kiddie stuff on there. And track the IP of the people who are putting the kiddie stuff on there. Because I bet you're going to find a whole lot more of that. And with that, we're out of news. We finished up again today. That was cool. But it's Tuesday, which means it's time for the rules of acquisition. As we always do on Tuesday. Being capitalists, good capitalists around here, we look at the fictitious religion of the fictitious species known as the Ferengi from the Star Trek universe, in which they don't have 10 commandments, they have 400 commandments, many of them not appearing in either alpha or beta canon through the show, so we have an abbreviated list of the 400 rules of acquisition, but every single week we go through one of these rules of acquisition, explain if it can be used in our real-life universe. In rare instances, it cannot, as was last week's. That was a terrible one. But we go through one of them, see if it can be used in our universe, explain why it can, or in last week's case, why it can't, and how it was used in the program or the book that it was written in as well. So, we just finished up the 211th, which was the one that I did not care for. And I was very open about the fact that I didn't care for that one last week. We move on to the 212th rule of acquisition. This one comes from Star Trek Online, so there's question whether or not this is canonical. We are still going to go over it. A good lie is easier to believe than the truth. A bit less business operated and a bit more philosophical. And now we'll think about some of the things that are going out here. And this goes right on the heels of the 208th rule of acquisition. Sometimes the only thing more dangerous than a question is an answer. We are unfortunately in a society that doesn't value truth. A lot of people will say that they do, but there's no value to truth right now. There is some, but very little. I'm not going to say there's no value to it, but there's very little to it. Because even as Morpheus explained, and we're going to switch fandoms here for a little bit and talk about the Matrix for a bit. Walking through explaining the Matrix, millions of people just living and dying, living their lives, doing their jobs, unaware of the fact that they're only computer avatars and their real bodies are tapped into a machine powering a race of robots that's enslaved them. Because that's a situation where a good lie is easier to believe than the truth. I mean, if that dystopia was true and you found out about it, how would you react? Would you be like, oh cool, let's go back and do something? Or would you do like Neo did and realize, unjack yourself from the Matrix and land on the deck and throw up because it's too much all at once? And there are a lot of things like that. Some of it's the government's coming out to tell us what we want to hear so we stay complacent. And there are a lot of people who find a lot of comfort in the complacency. It's easy to see, and it's easy to be comfortable too. Because a lot of the times the truth hurts. I mean, I can go back to some of my own experience. Going through, realizing I'd, at the time, only blown 2 engagements. I've now moved on to blowing 3 of them. But with my last live-in girlfriend, who clearly, and it became clear as soon as we moved in together, was just looking for somebody to subsidize her living arrangement. And yet I held on for well over a year before being graciously broken up with. Because I didn't want to believe the fact that somebody would actually move somebody in just to subsidize their living expenses. That if you were going to live together, you were really, really happy and in love with each other. She hadn't spoken to me in 6 months and I still wanted to go back out and believe it. It led me to be very depressed, by the way, in doing so. It was that good lie, even if the good lie that I was telling to myself was easier to believe than the truth. And it happens that way a lot of the time out there. Something I can admit to myself, and it's something I think a lot of us can really admit to too. I mean, think of how much, I say this reading about a fictional race, by the way, but how much effort we put onto fiction in this country, and how some people even get lost in fiction, sometimes not being able to differentiate reality from the fiction they've created for themselves. Because being and living in that universe that they've created for themselves in their own minds is easier than dealing with the depravities and the mundanities of everyday life. So, again, much more philosophical than capitalistic, but still a good one to look at here. A good lie is easier to believe than the truth. And with that, take one more check at the live chat here. Sedevacanthus Bear is here, by the way. Welcome, Sedevacanthus Bear. Spartan with the Quark sticker, thank you. Who's responsible? Well, we're not going to go down that road, Spartan. I know where you're going with that. We're not going to go down that road here at this point, but we are going to head out of here for the night. I know exactly where you're going with that. And while still being on YouTube, we're not going to go down that road. All right, so with that, we are out of here. Thanks to everybody who came by, hung out, and chatted with us throughout the night. It's been a great time. Sedevacanthus Bear coming in with us. I haven't seen that name in quite a while, so thank you for that. Thank you, Spartan, Mogwai, and Silentcaster here for coming in and joining us here, and everybody who came by and lurked. There were some numbers in all the platforms of people who did not come in and say hi, but at least we're here watching. We'll be back here tomorrow for more news, more headlines, and more contemporary. I'm going to go grab some dinner here. Some updates as well. We'll probably see some of the stuff that's going on here. And I've got some stuff that I saved especially based on the fact that I knew that we're going to be spending pretty much most of our 2 hours talking about the Donald and the Hunter and the indictment and the Jack Smith. Come back and join me here 6 p.m. Central Time tomorrow. For more news, more headlines, and more contemporary, take care. Have a good night. Hug your family, call your friends, and get some dinner. And we will see you here next time on Contemporary. And until tomorrow, I am Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. Take care.